my name is Visor. Today I'm going to be doing a video game reflection. Video game reflections are supposed to be videos where I talk about a specific game topic and discuss it, post my thoughts, my opinions, stuff like that. Though the videos end up becoming kind of weird because, well, I'll be honest, I'm new to making videos, and first couple videos end up being like game reviews, which is not something I'm remotely interested in doing. Anyway, so we're going to refocus and do it like how I intended it. So today's topic is going to be League of Legends, specifically why I hate the store system. Now, there are other MOBA games, and there are definitely worse store systems, but ultimately there's just a lot of room for improvement in the League of Legends store system. So let's get started. Now, for the most part, I like the right side. It's pretty good. The recommended items, there's some things I would change there, but for the most part, pretty good. Now the left side, that's where the biggest problems are. This whole top part here, really not necessary. I'll be honest, I didn't realize this thing was even here until I hit level 30. I just never looked at it. I just automatically knew, well, I want to find shit, so I click on stuff. The bigger problem is actually the filtering. You click through 2 buttons, and you still end up with 20, 30 items, and that's just not very useful, Really, for anyone. For new players, this is just a lot of stuff. And they don't even see stats here, so, I mean, sure, they can go by overlay one by one, but that takes too long. That's why you have a lot of new players, getting tagged for being AFK and spawn. There's just a lot of stuff to read here. For old players, it still isn't effective, There's also other issues, for example, showing the Dominion and the Twisted Tree Line items. I don't know why they would show them here. I'm on Summoner's Rift. These items are worthless and shouldn't be shown. There's just no reason for it. Maybe there's a design issue. I don't know what the issue is, but realistically, it shouldn't be done this way. However, complaining is easy, so I'm going to try to offer some solutions. Of course, we're going to start with the biggest issue, the filtering. Now, I will be presenting an implementation of my solutions, but really, I'm trying to present the ideas, not so much the implementation. I mostly do an implementation just because it shows my ideas better and makes it easier to understand. Plus, otherwise, it'd just be a blank video for 10 minutes and me talking over it, and that's boring as hell. But ultimately, my Photoshop skills aren't that great, so don't judge the visuals too much. I'm really not that great at laying that stuff out. Anyway, let's get started. So when it comes to item filtering, ultimately it comes down to a way to organize the items. Now, the in-game store organizes items by stats, and while this initially seems rather intuitive, it runs into the issue that there are too many items that has a particular stat. I mean, there's at least 20 items that has health, probably at least 20 items that give you AD. And then you get certain items like Trinity Force that shows up in, 8 of the categories. I think it's 8, somewhere around those lines. Anyway, so what would the better approach be? Well, if you look at the items in League of Legends, they all basically break down into different tiers. You get your basic items that build into your advanced items, and you get your advanced items that build into your legendary items. And for most of the basic stats, they all come from a specific source. For example, if you want to build something with health, your starting point is pretty much Ruby Crystal and Giant's Belt. If you want to build something with magic resist or armor, both cases, your starting point is either the Null Magic Mantle, Megatron Cloak, or Cloth Armor and Chain Vest. Now, of course, this only covers the basic stats. There are more complicated stats like Spell Vamp or cooldown reduction. For those, you would need to know the advanced items they come from. But still, for the most part, it follows the same logic. For example, for all your Spell Vamp items, you just need to remember, Spell Vamp comes from the Hexatech Revolver. Admittedly, cooldown reduction is a bit harder since you get like 5 items that they come from. Your Kindle Gem, your Glacial Shroud, Brutalizer, Fiendish Codex, and that other item that I don't really like, Stinger. I guess you can also count the Soul Stealer, but you don't build stuff out of that, so I don't really care. Sure, some stats are not shown on the first page, but I'm really not too bothered by that. Most new players don't know about the hard cap and cooldown reduction anyway, they don't quite understand Spell Vamp at that point. Really, those things are going to be stuff they're going to have to research while they're learning the game anyway. At least with this, all the basic stats are easy to access. If they want to build more ability power, they know these are the 3 things they have to look at. They need to build more mana regen. These are the 2 items they have to look at. Once they have the basics down, yeah, they can move on, and I think this interface will be easier for them as well. And for, more experienced players that really know their items, I find this far more convenient than having to click through 2 buttons and having 20, 30 items on that page. For example, let's say I want to build Shirley's Reverie. I start with a regrowth pendant, and I say, okay, I need a Philostone. And look, there they are. 2 things that build from Philostone. At no point was there a page with a scroll bar that had to really sort through anything complicated. Now you could say, well, what about your first page? Didn't that have like 20 plus items? Isn't that a problem? And it's true, there are more than 20 items here. At the same time, I really don't find this more complicated. These are all very basic items that I pretty much know to use at this point. So I suppose this is all based on my opinion, so if you have a different opinion, feel free to speak up. Personally, I think this is the best way to organize all the items in the game. Or at least it would be the best way if all the items in the game were built just from the basic items. Unfortunately, there are 3 groups of items that aren't included. For example, your temporary items like your Dorians, your consumable items, and any of those champion-specific items. My approach to those items is to have them on a separate tab that's always on the screen when your shop is up. And this tab would change depending on your champion and the map you're playing. For example, if you're playing Dominion, you wouldn't have the Dorian's Blade, Dorian's Ring over here, you would have the Prospector Ring, Prospector Blade. Or if you're playing Rengar, you would have his necklace up here. The greatest benefit, however, is by having these items up all the time, it doesn't mess with your main item filtering over here. This way, when you go back to base and have to consider buying your consumables, it doesn't mess with the big item you were working toward. Now, you might be wondering, well, how can new players use this? Really, for a new player, these things are meaningless. Well, first of all, there's still the overlay. When you mouse over stuff, that's still usable. Additionally, I do want this tab to sort of slide out. Well, I mean, obviously you would animate it and not make it just pop out like that, but the important thing is you can still see most of the stuff here. So you'll notice that for certain items I have the word more here and more here. Well, I couldn't fit all the text here. I mean, I obviously was able to fit some stats here, which I think is better than what we're currently doing. But really, to see the full text, you would need some sort of a display over here, like this. So all this stuff should still happen. So between the overlay and this thing over here, new players can still find out what these items are. For older players, I don't think it's a big deal. I don't think they would ever actually have this open. They should know what these items are by now. And while we're on the topic of how items are displayed, I would like to mention another benefit of filtering by items. By reducing the number of items that appear per page, you can actually put more space towards showing the item's stats. And I think that's very useful for new players. Sure, you can't see all of the stats as shown here, but at least it's better than nothing. Because otherwise, the old system was just, a name and a price. That's not all that useful. They don't really know what half things are. Sure, maybe they won't call Tandem Dancers double swords now, but other than that, they don't actually know anything about the item. Say, but they can use the overlay. Yes, they can use the overlay, but using that for 20 items is kind of slow. Another thing about displaying items, I've always liked how the game darkens items that you can't afford yet, but even that, I don't think it goes far enough. I think you sort of put a border around the items, and when you can't afford it, yeah, it's darkened out, but also have the border sort of fill up depending on how much gold they have. So when the border fills up all the way, the item lightens, and it's very easy to see that you can afford it. And when you can't afford an item, you can see how much farther you have to go, whether you're halfway there or just almost there. Now, there's one last thing I would do when it comes to item filtering, and that's add a search bar. Search bar should be pretty straightforward. Just go by item name. I mean, Riot knows how to make search bars. They have them all over the place, and they're usually pretty good. This would be another way to quickly find items if you know the item name. This is also useful for players trying to build an item when they don't know the build path. Like if you're telling your friend what to do or something along those lines. Another thing that I want to show is how I think this part should interact with filtering. Ideally, when you click on something on the left, it should change the left side and change over here. When you select a part of an item over here, it should show what it builds into over on the left side. For example, if I clicked on Regrowth Pendant, it should, show what Regrowth Pendant builds into. But when I click on Philostone, both sides should update. So the left side shows what it builds into, and shows the item on the right side. Then I can, of course, click on Shirley's Reverie again, and have it show up on the right side. Now, why did I show this? Well, the important thing is, by doing it this way, you don't need a builds into bar over here at all. Anything you click on over here should just show what it builds into on the left side. So what can you do with the extra space? Now, if it were me, I would use that space to mess around with recommended items. Basically give you control here, so if you click this plus sign, it adds whatever recommended items down here to that slot. Also, there's a reset button to set it to the default items again, just because, I mean, most people, if they really understand the game, they won't need the reset button, but if new players make a mistake, at least the recommended item is a good place to start. Now, you might have noticed there are 8 items here. Well, that's because for the most part, builds are not just 6 items. If you look at what they recommended for Vayne or Biz, you would notice there's some temporary items in there that you don't really expect to be part of a 6-item build. Now, if you were to switch over to an 8-item build, you can do a lot more stuff. For example, you can throw in your temporary items, you can throw in your situational items, because sometimes you want a quick silver sash, sometimes you don't. And for a champ like Fizz, for example, you can really change the order of items. Because after all, getting an early Sheen after your Dorians is pretty good. But rushing at Lichbane is not. You generally want that after your other AP items. And doing it this way shows pretty clear progression. It shows that, hey, early Sheen, no problem. Early Lichbane, probably not that great. If you really want to go all out, you can also tag these things as temporary items or situational items. Temporary and situational are kind of long. I'm sure you can find better words for that, but you get the idea. Now really the only thing left to do would be the item slots and the buy and sell buttons. And they're usually pretty easy, unless you're me and you screwed up your planning somehow. I'm sure Riot wouldn't make the same mistake. Though there is something else that I think would be pretty cool to have that's not in the game. Currently when you go into the shop, your keyboard is pretty much useless. It doesn't really do much. It'd be really cool to get some hotkeys. Maybe some hotkeys to, buy consumables, or some hotkeys to select your item slots, or some hotkeys to select what your recommended items are. Plus, of course, hotkeys for buying and selling. That would be pretty cool. Maybe another hotkey to get into the search bar. It seems kind of weird that the store interface is pretty much all mouse-driven when you really have a pretty good keyboard that you probably could be using. So yeah, that's my thought on the League of Legends store system and how to make it better. The item filtering just has to be changed. The current form is just terrible. It's not useful at all. Consumables has to be more available. You should be able to access them from any page in the store, because these are things you should be buying every time you go back to base anyway. A search bar would be useful, better use of space than whatever we have up here right now. I definitely think the recommended items should show 8 items and not just 6. Most builds have temporary items in there, and there's special orders and situational items. These things are just necessary. Plus, having a way to set the recommended items from the game would be so much better than having to use third-party programs or editing the INI files. And really finally, hotkeys. I just want hotkeys for everything here. I don't know what the best keys are yet, but I want to have the option to change them. Anyway, this is Visor, and thank you for watching my video. Hopefully my arguments have been convincing so far, or at the very least you can sort of see the problem with the current store system. Everywhere I post this video should have a place for discussion. Maybe we'll get some nice lively discussion out of this. Ultimately, I really like League of Legends, but I hate the store system. And even if my ideas aren't used, I definitely think it needs to be improved. On a more personal note, I'm still very new to the whole making videos for YouTube type of deal, and we really appreciate any advice they can give. Either way, my ramblings are done, and I'm out. So, see you guys next time.